Reading from Srila Prabhupada, Leela Amrita. I have done my part. The devotees working closely with Srila Prabhupada did not think he was deteriorating. No matter how he appeared, he was just giving them another opportunity to serve him. If he wanted to eat or didn't want to eat, if he was displeased or pleased, if he appeared well or ill, they would respond accordingly out of duty and love. This mood was becoming increasingly prominent as Srila Prabhupada more and more depended on his disciples to help him carry out all his functions. He said that he was remaining in the world only to satisfy his disciples' sincere desires to serve him. Yet he continued to emphasize that their service to his physical form was not as important as their following his instructions. When two of Prabhupada's sannyasis were taking leave of him, he smiled pleasingly and said, I may stay or go, but in my books I will live forever. When he heard that 40,000 hardbound books had been distributed in 1 week, he said, if book distribution increases, I will never die. I will be living for centuries. Tamal Krishna remarked that the book distribution reports were one kind of news that didn't give Prabhupada a headache. And Prabhupada smiled broadly. No, he said, it is my life. Can someone get me a tissue? But one day, while sitting in the garden with Tamal Krishna, Swarup Damodar and others, Srila Prabhupada became very disturbed when he detected a mistake in one of his already printed books. Tamal Krishna was reading aloud a verse from the first canto which began, Munio Sadaprishto Ham. Srila Prabhupada had him read the synonyms. Tamal Krishna read, Munaya, O sages. Sadhu, this is relevant. Prishta, questioned. Sadhu, asked Srila Prabhupada. Thus he uncovered a thoughtless mistake made by the Sanskrit editors. Sadhu means devotee, not this is relevant. Srila Prabhupada became very angry and denounced the rascal Sanskrit scholars. A little learning, he said, is dangerous. Immediately they think they have become big scholars, thinking I shall arrange, and then they write all nonsense. He continued speaking about the mistake for half an hour. He was disturbed. He ordered Tamal Krishna to write at once to the BBT and stop these speculations by his disciples, changing his books in the name of editing. The devotees were startled to see Prabhupada so angry. He was supposed to be peacefully relishing a Srimad Bhagavatam reading here in his garden. Such a change was very serious, he said, because it changed the meaning. Even if the authorized acharyas would make a mistake, he said, it would not be changed. This is Arsha Prayog. In this way, the acharyas are honored. By Srila Prabhupada's strong reaction to this one printed mistake, he was again stressing the great importance of his books. Whatever I have wanted to say, he explained, I have said in my books. If I live, I will say something little more. If you want to know me, read my books. Srila Prabhupada ki. Thank you very much for bringing this. That's confidently. So we're reading from Sri Caitanya Charitamrta, Madhya Lila, chapter 18, verse 68. And the chapter is entitled, The Lord's Visit to Sri Vrindavan. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Although this verse doesn't have a purport, as soon as I read it, I thought it was, I just, 2 days ago I listened to an hour and 30-minute long class by Mahatma Prabhu giving a class on this subject. So I'm just going to listen to, so I'm going to go through this verse. Yamala Juna Bangadi Tekila Se Stala Yamala Juna Bangadi Tekila Se Stala Yamala Juna Bangadi Tekila Se Stala Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala Yamala Juna Bangadi Tekila Sestala Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala Yamala Juna Bangadi Tekila Sestala Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala Yamala Juna Bangadi Sestala
Yamala Juna Bangadi Tekila Sestala Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala
Yamajuna Bangadi Tekila Sestala
Yamala Bangadi Tekila Sestala
Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala
Prema Veshe Prabhura Mana Haila Talamala
Yamala Arjuna Banga, the place where the twin Arjun trees were broken. Adi, beginning with Dekila, so, Sestala, that place, Prema Aveshe, in great ecstasy, Prabhura, of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Mana, mind. Hoila became. Kalamala agitated. Translation. Upon seeing the place where the twin Arjun trees had been broken by Sri Krishna, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu was moved to great ecstatic love. So I'm going to read a little from the pastime from the 10th canto, chapter 10, and the background to this pastime of the felling of how Krishna brought down the twin Arjun trees. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 10. So this is Srila Prabhupada's own purports on these verses. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shukadev Goswami said, O King Parikshit, because the two sons of Kuvera had been elevated to the association of Lord Shiva, of which they were very much proud, they were allowed to wander in a garden attached to Kailash Hill on the bank of the Mandakini River. Taking advantage of this, they used to drink a kind of liquor called Varuni. Accompanied by women singing after them, they would wander in that garden of flowers, their eyes always rolling in intoxication. Within the garden, within the waters of the Mandakini Ganges, which were crowded with gardens of lotus flowers, the two sons of Kuvera would enjoy young girls, just like two male elephants enjoying in the water with female elephants. O Maharaj Parikshit, by some auspicious opportunity for the two boys, the great saint Devarshi Narada once appeared there by chance. Seeing them intoxicated with rolling eyes, he could understand their situation. Upon seeing Narada, the naked young girls of the demigods were very much ashamed. Afraid of being cursed, they covered their bodies with their garments. But the two sons of Kuvera did not do so. Instead, not caring about Narada, they remained naked. Seeing the two sons of the demigods naked and intoxicated by opulence and false prestige, Devarshi Narada, in order to show them special mercy, desired to give them a special curse. He spoke as follows. Narada Muni said, among all the attractions of material enjoyment, the attraction of riches bewilders one's intelligence more than having beautiful bodily features, taking birth in an aristocratic family and being learned. When one is uneducated but falsely puffed up by wealth, the result is that one engages his wealth in enjoying wine, women, and gambling. Unable to control their senses, rascals who are falsely proud of their riches or their birth in aristocratic families are so cruel that to maintain their perishable bodies, which they think will never grow old or die, they kill poor animals without mercy. Sometimes they kill animals merely to enjoy an excursion. While living, one may be proud of one's body, thinking oneself a very big man, minister, president, or even demigod. But whatever one may be, after death, this body will turn either into worms, into stool, or into ashes. If one kills poor animals to satisfy the temporary whims of this body, one does not know that he will suffer in his next birth, for such a sinful miscreant must go to hell and suffer the results of his actions. So then Narada Muni talks about how, in contrast to rich people who become proud of their wealth and due to lack of culture engage in abominable activities, a very, very poor person, a really penniless person, he has no opportunity to really perform sinful activities. And in this way, he's more fortunate because he has the opportunity to hear from sadhus, So this is Narada Muni now talking about these poverty-stricken persons who may appear externally very unfortunate, but who he sees as being much more fortunate. So he's describing them here. Always hungry, longing for sufficient food, a poverty-stricken man gradually becomes weaker and weaker. Having no extra potency, his senses are automatically pacified. A poverty-stricken man, therefore, is unable to perform harmful, envious activities. In other words, such a man automatically gains the results of the austerities and penances adopted voluntarily by saintly persons. Saintly persons may freely associate with those who are poverty-stricken, but not with those who are rich. A poverty-stricken man, by association with saintly persons, very soon becomes uninterested in material desires, and the dirty things within the core of his heart are cleansed away. Saintly persons think of Krishna 24 hours a day. They have no other interest. Why should people neglect the association of such exalted spiritual personalities and try to associate with materialists, taking shelter of non-devotees, most of whom are proud and rich? Therefore, since these two persons drunk with the liquor named Varuni or Madhvi are unable to control their senses, have been blinded by the pride of celestial opulence, and have become attached to women, I shall relieve them of their false prestige. These two young men, Nalakuvara and Manigriva, are by fortune the sons of the great demigod Kuvera, but because of false prestige and madness after drinking liquor, they are so fallen that they are naked but cannot understand that they are. Therefore, because they are living like trees, for trees are naked but are not conscious, these two young men should receive the bodies of trees. This will be proper punishment. Nonetheless, after they become trees and until they are released by my mercy, they will have remembrance of their past sinful activities. Moreover, by my special favor, after the expiry of 100 years by the measurement of the demigods, they will be able to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, face to face, and thus revive their real position as devotees. So Shukadev Goswami in these presentations of Narada's words, and also Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he makes the point that Nalakuvara and Manigriva, they're not being cursed because they were like frolicking with celestial ladies naked in Lord Shiva's lake at Kailash. They're being chastised or they're being rectified because of their pride. And the reason they're being rectified because of their pride is because Narada, being a pure devotee of Krishna, sees that these two sons of Kuvera, they had a wonderful opportunity. They'd been allowed to associate with like the residents of Kailash. They've been allowed to enter into that very sacred realm of Kailash, which was actually inhabited by many of the greatest sages in the universe. Sages like Pulaha and Pulasya had their ashrams in this area, and Duvasa Muni also preferred to go to Kailash when he wasn't otherwise engaged. And also, as the sons of Kuvera is one of the prominent demigods, who actually understands that his duty is to assist Indra, the king of the demigods, assist the other demigods, and he understands that, at least he understands Vishnu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he would expect his sons also to become great devotees. So Narada is thinking, this is terrible that these two boys, these two highly elevated persons who've actually had the opportunity to associate with Lord Shiva's devotees are now engaging in these activities. Or not so much that they're engaging in the activities, but they've become so puffed up with pride that upon seeing a devotee of Krishna himself. It's not that Narada Muni wasn't puffed up thinking that I'm a devotee of Krishna, they shouldn't behave like this in front of me. But no, they knew who Narada Muni was. He's like extremely famous as a devotee of Krishna. But due to intense pride, they were so like ignorant that they didn't offer that respect. So Narada Muni was think this is my duty to curse these boys for the sake of their father, for the sake of Lord Shiva, for the sake of all of their associates in the heavenly planets. It's my duty to curse them so that they can actually become poverty-stricken, just like Shukadeva Goswami is saying, a poverty-stricken man becomes weaker and weaker, and then his natural humility arises, and he remembers that he's a servant of the Supreme Lord. So this was the intention behind Narada's curse. And then Narada gave them the special benediction that they would reside as Arjuna trees in the place that would become the courtyard of Nanda Maharaj, where Krishna performed his childhood pastimes in Gokula. And it was already a holy place anyway, because Mahavan was the place where Dhruva Maharaj performed his austerities. It's eternally a holy place. So they were purified, and they were being touched by the atmosphere of Vraj even before Krishna appeared. So then when Krishna did appear, then they were, they were in a perfect place to see Krishna's most amazing pastimes. In fact, you probably couldn't think of a better place to be than to be trees, because they didn't need to hide away to, anyone else who wanted to go to see Krishna's pastimes, they'd have to disguise themselves or hide away. But they could see absolutely everything that went on. They called twin Arjuna trees because they're brothers, and they're like, you see trees that grow from the same stump, so they were like that. At the bottom, they were joined, so they had each other's like intimate association throughout that life. So then the pastime continues that at this point in the description of Krishna's pastimes, this is chapter 10. So in the previous chapter, chapter 9, is the pastime of Damodar being bound by Mother Yashoda, tied to the grinding mortar. And so he's tied to the mortar, and then temporarily Mother Yashoda goes away because she needs to attend to like all of the mess that Krishna's created. She needs to get on with her service to Krishna. So she's like confident that Krishna is now tied up. And so she temporarily goes away. So at that time, Krishna knows that the Yamala Arjuna trees are there. So he decides this is a good time to fulfill the purpose of my pure devotee's curse, Narada, to fulfill his desire that these two personalities get Krishna Bhakti, basically. So he thought, but also it's described that simultaneously with that desire to satisfy Narada's wish for them, he also simultaneously thought, here's an opportunity to do something even more naughty. I've broken the pot of yogurt, fed it to the monkeys, and just created a mess. But now I've been tied up. But because I'm God, even though I'm still tied up, I can still do mischief when I'm tied up. So he decides that he's going to pull down. He didn't have to pull down the trees for them to be light. He could have just he could have just liberated them immediately and sent them off to Vaikuntha. But And he thought, okay, well, let me take advantage of my duty here to my pure devotee. Let me take advantage of this situation to have another nice pastime. And it's described by the acharyas that the cowherd boys, they'd actually, when they saw Mother Yashoda running after Krishna with a stick, they thought they were going to be next for punishment. So they'd all run up a tree. So they were all hiding up in a tree. And then, so when Krishna decided he was going to pull down the Arjuna trees, he looked up at the cowherd boys and he winked at them, and said, look at this, look at what I'm going to do now. And so as you've probably seen the pictures of Krishna tied to the mortar, I don't know if there's probably a picture in here, isn't there? There it is. Oh no, this is the picture when he's released. All right, the picture's not here. But anyway, when you see there's a picture of Krishna tied to the mortar, he's like the mortar's taller than him, and he's tied to it he can't really move. So it's described by our acharyas that the rope and the mortar, they take the initiative. They want to get involved in the pastime as well. So, so it's described. To meet Krishna personally is a very rare perfection for which neither okay, so here we're talking about Nalakuvera. Okay, so Krishna says, Krishna's thinking, because Narada Muni disseminates devotion all over the three worlds, he is very dear to me. For his sake I will free Kuvera's sons from their tree bodies, bless them with supreme devotion and send them back to their abode. Krishna moved forward. Sometimes he pulled the mortar, sometimes the mortar moved on its own. By coming in contact with Krishna, both the rope and the mortar assumed spiritual forms and so could act according to their own will, and both wanted to serve Krishna in their own way. The cowherd boys watched in amazement as Krishna's effulgence spread to both the rope and the mortar. Their amazement grew further when the mortar continued to move on its own, even when the rope became slack. How is the mortar moving on its own? How is the mortar moving on its own? It's not. I suppose this must be the cowherd boys talking here. No, it's the cowherd boys, yeah. How is that mortar moving on its own? It is not. It is rolling downhill. It is not rolling. It is sliding and never picking up momentum. Then it is sliding on its own. You are being silly. No, you are the silly one. How else could it be moving when the rope is slack? Look, because it's tied to Krishna, like he, the mortar can do anything. That is true. Look again. The mortar is just like the rope. It is sometimes snaking along on its own. They are both alive. Why not? They are connected to Damodar. Whatever the rope and mortar are doing, it appears that Krishna is headed towards those trees. The distance between Krishna and the Arjuna trees was closing. Observing the Lord approaching, the two trees quivered in anticipation, overjoyed that their term of exile would soon be over. Bowing with the wind, their rustling leaves seemed to say, O Lord, we offer our obeisances unto you. So then so then Krishna was in front of the mortar, and the mortar had to kind of get jammed in between the two trunks of the trees, and there was a little hole underneath that he could kind of hide into there. And then when the mortar had been up straight, but to enable it to pull down the trees, it went down like that. And then the trees, the two Arjuna trees, they were very happy that they weren't going to fall and crush Krishna because they were like that. They just fell outwards like that. So then then the two demigods, Nalakuvara and Manigriva, then they like become manifest in their demigod forms. They like appear they appear there in front of Krishna and the cowherd boys. And they offer respect. They offer they offer very beautiful prayers. Actually, they're really, really beautiful prayers to Krishna. I'll read one of them in particular. This is especially for Raghunath. This one. Ani gunana katane shravano katayam hastarchikam sumanastavapadayona smrityam shirascha nivasa jagat praname tristi sitam dashanestu bhavatununam. Henceforward, may all our words describe your pastimes. May our ears engage in oral reception of your glories. May our hands, legs, and other senses engage in actions pleasing to you. And may our minds always think of your lotus feet. May our heads offer our obeisances to everything within this world, because all things are also your different forms. And may our eyes see the forms of Vaishnavas who are not different from you. And Shukadev Goswami continues, the two demigods thus offered prayers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. O Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Godhead, is the master of all and was certainly Gokuleshwara, the master of Gokul. He was bound to the wooden mortar by the ropes of the gopis, and therefore, smiling widely, he spoke to the sons of Kavera the following words. So Krishna was proud to be proud to have been bound up both by the ropes of the older gopis in this pastime, but it could also refer to the ropes of the gopis' affection for him. So he's like saying that this is my real opulence. My real opulence is not my power to be able to pull down trees or my power to be able to like destroy all the demons. But my real opulence is that I'm actually the plaything of the gopis. That's my real opulence. There's no other incarnation ever who's been the plaything of the gopis. And and Krishna says, O Nalakuvra and Manigriva, now you may both return home, since you desire to be always absorbed in my devotional service. Your desire to develop love and affection for me will be fulfilled, and now you will never fall from that platform. So it's interesting, the two demigods, they actually went back to the heavenly planets. They didn't go to the spiritual world. And as far as I can understand, they wouldn't have known that Gokula on this planet is like the same as Goloka in the spiritual world. Very, very, very few devotees of Krishna know about the eternal pastimes of Krishna in the spiritual world. It's really only through Lord Caitanya and the Goswamis that we really know about those things. I mean, Lord Brahma had some inclination, as you read in the Brahma Samhita, but Krishna was considering, no, that Nalakuva and Manigriva, they've been observing my pastimes for so long, and now they'll want to go home and tell all of the demigods about it, and and their family will be so glad to see them, and also that they can continue to be absorbed in his devotional service. So this is like Lord Caitanya says, Nadanam najanam nasundarim kavitam vajgadisha kamaye mama janmani janmanishware bhavatad bhakti ahoiti tvayi. So Lord Caitanya, he's portraying the mood that he's portraying the mood of the pure devotee. I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any other opulence. My only desire is to be able to serve you birth after birth. So in that sense, even though Krishna has said to them, you can go back to the planets of the demigods, he's actually blessing them with the highest benediction of unmotivated devotional service, where they'll always be able to remember Krishna in any situation. And in that sense, there's no difference between the material world and the spiritual world. So I reckon, so you can understand why Lord Caitanya was ecstatic when he came to this place, like in Gokula, because like he would have been remembering, being there and performing that pastime. And so it's like very, very nice. So I'll stop there. Are there any comments or questions? I recommend you read that chapter if you've got time. And also, this is Shivaram Swami's book. So he's actually studied all of the commentaries of the acharyas on this pastime. And then also I've shared a link actually to Mahatma Prabhu's class that he gave. Very, very nice class just 2 days ago. I listened to it, although it was recorded about, I don't know how long ago, maybe a year ago at the Manor. Okay. Have we got a question, Prabhu?
Yeah, just before class, you're reading from Prabhupada weekend. I could ask a question about that.
Yes, Prabhu.
It's related to Prabhupada's impressing that in the name of editing, changing the meaning of things. Interesting point, because one might argue then why have to change anything? Not like everything the same. So it seems like Prabhupada is not unaware of editing. For that to be going on, it must have been authorized by him to do that.
Yeah, well, as far as I understand, I've kind of been keeping tabs on the development of the editing of Prabhupada's books and the kind of difficulties the devotees have had in coming to some kind of understanding of what Prabhupada wanted. And so according to the understanding I've gained from hearing from those devotees who consider it their duty to monitor those changes, then what Srila Prabhupada is saying here is, I've given authorization to my editors to correct mistakes, grammatical mistakes. Because as we know, Prabhupada didn't have a very big vocabulary. He didn't have a very, he learned English in the beginning of the 20th century. Sorry?
I think he did quite a bit of vocabulary. Personally speaking, there's many words I never used all in Prabhupada's books.
Okay.
But I can't be honest with you, maybe you meant to say something else.
Okay. Well, what I meant to say is that he was authorizing his disciples to correct grammatical and spelling mistakes and like what you might call mistakes that would present completely the wrong impression. But what he saw here was that his editors had been studying Sanskrit and would think so every word in Sanskrit is said has got 5 different meanings. And one meaning of sadhu is, as we know, it's like an expression of appreciation for a sadhu's cutting through ignorance. And so we hear sadhu, it means you're spot on with your analysis. But that's actually, that meaning is what it's called that's the secondary meaning. And you only use the secondary meaning when it's difficult to actually understand how the primary meaning is used. But in this verse, it's obvious it's the primary meaning. Munya sadhu prishnoham. Can find that. It's in the first canto. I think it's first canto, chapter 2, verse 5. But it's very obvious. It doesn't require any interpretation. But they were thinking, they'd probably just read somewhere that sadhu means, you're spot on with that, and they thought perhaps Prabhupada would be impressed by it. So, but that's basically it. That the Vedas. Any verses in the Vedic literature, in the Bhagavatam, the Upanishads, the Puranas, any Vedic literature, if the meaning is obvious, there's no need to look to all of the other different possible meanings. But if there's some difficulty in understanding it, if it seems to be like allegorical or some kind of metaphor, and it's very difficult to understand the literal meaning, then you can consult the commentaries of the previous acharyas. And they may disagree. Some of them may say, it means this. So if they disagree, then you should actually say that they disagree. And you should actually put a note, like Sriva Ramaswamy does this. He'll actually, in this book, in one small chapter, just about 20 pages, it might have 150 notes of where all of the references of the places, and in some places he'll say that Sanatana Goswami says this, and Sridhar Swami says this, and then like that. So, but these young devotees who'd only been studying Sanskrit for maybe a year, they were thinking that they were qualified to override the commentaries of the acharyas. There's a very nice description of this point by Prem Shvaig, disciple of Srila Prabhupada, Garuda Das, who explains that this is the way forward, is to annotate, or he's suggesting it. Anyway, he's on a committee which was which was asked by the GBC to bring together academic scholars with ISKCON devotees, and Mula Devi Dasa is on it as well. And this was what he was suggesting, that if you any difficulty in understanding what way to translate it, then you should put a footnote, or you should put a note at the end of the chapter. Okay, so is that okay, Prabhu?
Javat was talking about even if the Acharya commits some mistake, it should be corrected.
Yes.
So interesting that there's obviously the mentality of the devotee was he was trying to be too intelligent. I would warn against that. If we try to be too intelligent and correct the spiritual master thinking you go better. And then someone could use that argument to say, well, for example, the first edition of Bhagavad Gita, then why should that be corrected? But the point is, it wasn't Prabhupada's fault, it was a person who transcribed the dictations. It was their fault because they didn't actually write down what Prabhupada said. So in each case, it seems like the opposite, actually the same principles underlying, that one shouldn't change what the spiritual master says.
Yeah. Because we don't really know, do we? Well, I mean, we do know that we do know from our humble position that Srila Prabhupada had many inexplicable transcendental events in his life where it was obvious that he was receiving direct communication from Krishna. And he was never at a loss to be able to defeat anybody in discussion. And one of his Shama Sundra Prabhu, who was his personal servant for many years, and who himself was an extremely intelligent and capable person, and also very streetwise person as well. He said that Srila Prabhupada was undoubtedly the most intelligent person he'd ever met, and that he was never in any danger of being defeated by anyone in argument whatsoever. So that means that he's far, far, far above our ability to understand his level of intelligence and also his level of association with Lord Shiva and the demigods and Krishna's personal associates. So he's on the level of understanding Krishna's pastimes over vast lengths of time. So if he says something that we can't understand at all, then it may be that he understands that it's going to be of some importance in like 10,000 years, and therefore it shouldn't be changed. However, as I said, so this devotee, Graham Schweig, he said that the scholars who are meeting right now actually to discuss this, they recommend that Prabhupada's books should be actually printed exactly as we believe that Prabhupada spoke them, to the best of our ability to look at the archives and find out exactly what Prabhupada wrote. And then in the index, then we can suggest that, or we can just suggest that perhaps those people who don't have the time to really, really deeply study Prabhupada's books, then we can put forward some kind of simpler translation or some way that other people can understand it. And we can also put in the commentaries of the acharyas, Prabhupada was here, so that we can let people study it more if they want to enable them to see how Prabhupada wasn't just saying something really weird, but he was just repeating what the acharyas said. So anyway, it's very nice that we're very fortunate to live in this time when these matters have come to the stage where they've gone beyond the kind of infighting of different camps, and they're now being put into the hands of highly respected professionals who actually are doing the service of glorifying Srila Prabhupada and protecting his disciples from offending him. They actually feel privileged to be given this service of recommending how future generations of ISKCON can actually protect Srila Prabhupada's legacy. Sri Caitanya Charitamrta ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaura Premanand.